I guess you have a little bit of a problem, right? Water into wine is not such a complicated trick, but wine into water. Do you know how I did it? Are you dying for me to maybe tell you what I did? You know, the thing is I know a lot of you are sitting here and you're theorizing. It's all about the second glass. He loaded something in the second glass. There's got to be something in the second glass that when you dump the water in it, it turns to wine. I'm afraid you're going to have to find another theory, because it's still just water. So I'll leave you to worry about what happened and how I went about doing this trick and how it turned from water into wine and then back into water, and now why it won't turn back into. That's your problem to figure out. But let's talk about the story that we just witnessed. The details of the story are just like the video and the puppet told us. Jesus got invited to a wedding. It's just something that happens. I mean, I've been to weddings. Hey, I've been to my own wedding. Good thing I showed up for that one. That was probably very, very useful event in my life. But just being on time. I was on time for the wedding, by the way. I was actually very early for the wedding. So I've been to weddings, and so Jesus went to the wedding, and luckily he actually went. He didn't just get invited. Jesus went to the wedding, and he's there. And I just want to make sure you understand. He was there just like everybody else. I mean, he was partying with all the other people. He was doing the things that were had because he just kind of arrived, and Jesus is just hanging out at the wedding. He's got all of his apostles with him, and they're doing the wedding thing, and don't miss it. They were drinking, they were partying, they were celebrating, and Jesus was part of the wedding. And they run out of wine. Now, we didn't have wine at my wedding. I don't really care a great deal for wine. I don't mind that people drink wine. It's just never been my cup of tea. But that's okay. There's lots of people. But in biblical times, this was a bad thing. This was a really bad thing. And I guess it sort of works the same way here when you have a party, because when the liquor runs out, then guess what? The party's over. Isn't that the way it works? And you understand that was what was going to happen. When the wine ran out and there was no more wine to drink, then people were going to start going home because the party is over at that point. And so what happens is, Mary approaches Jesus with the problem. And, believe it or not, Jesus makes more wine from water. That's a cool story, isn't it? I mean, that is an awesome story. And when I read that story, I automatically start trying to answer questions. Just like right now, you're staring at this glass of clear water, and you're in your head, you're like, I got to know what he did. This is going to drive me crazy if I don't figure out what he did. I know he did something. I mean, either you have to figure I did something, or I should set up a booth down the Harry Potter thing and be doing this trick all day long for money. I mean, either I am a wizard or there's a trick. You know that, right? But then we read this story and we start asking all kind of questions. We ask questions like, why was Jesus at the wedding? I don't know. I mean, he was invited. I don't know if he knew the bridegroom. I don't know if it was a family member. I don't know what the issue was. All I know is Jesus was at a wedding. You know that when you go on sermoncentral.com and you try to Google this thing, you know there's a whole bunch of sermons out there explaining why Jesus was at the wedding? I don't care. It's unimportant. Then you have the question, why were they drinking so much wine? Well, you know what? I don't care. The story doesn't tell us. They drank wine in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. It was the beverage of choice. It was everywhere you went. There was wine and more wine, and they were drinking it. And why they were drinking wine? Well, it's probably because the water wasn't all that good, because they didn't have the nice filtration systems that we have. And so they probably drank wine as their beverage of choice. And just so you know, they probably had kids. Probably everybody drank wine back in that day. We ask questions like, well, when Jesus made the wine, was it fermented or unfermented? You know what? I don't care. The Bible calls it wine. Was it alcoholic or non-alcoholic? I don't know, but here's what I do know. It was good. Because they said it was good. See, I don't know the answer to these questions, and here's the problem. We read this story, and this is what we decide we're going to focus on. We want to have the understanding of why what happened. And the problem is that's the wrong focus. Now, you're thinking about this trick. You're thinking about this trick, and maybe you've got some theories about how I did it. Maybe you've given some thought to it. Maybe you've even nudged your neighbor and said, "What do you think?" Do you have any idea what he did? Obviously he did something. Maybe you can't wait till we say the word amen so you can come up on this stage and you can get a real close and personal look at these glasses and this table and this straw and this. By the way, Damien, what's in the bottle? Water. So you're going to come up here and you're going to make sure that Damien didn't miss something. Somehow, some way, something had to happen to make this work. And if you've got all those things going on in your mind, you're trying to figure out what I did, then you're hooked. I've got you. I've got your attention, because the only way you think you're ever going to figure out what I did is you're going to have to listen to me for the next few minutes in hopes that maybe I give you some glimmer of how the water changed. But here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to get so obsessed with the trick that you miss the lessons. Because when we read the story of Jesus and how he turned water into wine, while we want to focus on the water into wine, and we want to focus, I'm just knocking everything everywhere this morning, and we want to focus on this and that and the other, the truth is there are 5 really cool lessons that we can learn from the story. And it's a lesson that the adults can use, and guess what? It's a lesson that every single child here, every single teenager, everybody can use these 5 lessons. It really is that simple. So let's talk before we do the 5 lessons. Let's read the story in context. If you would like to follow along, you may turn to John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. If you did not bring your own copy of the Bible, you may pull the one from the pew rack, and you may turn not to 1181. That's Titus. We're moving back in the Bible. We're going to be on page 1050. So you can pull out the Bible and turn to page 1050, and this is the story as it was written by John. On the third day, this, folks, was a party. They were partying for 3 days. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. You might want to circle that. 20 to 30 gallons of water is what these things held. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim, and then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had turned into wine, and he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine," the good stuff, first. "And then the cheaper wine," the stuff that maybe doesn't taste all that good, but they don't really care at that point what it tastes like because they've had lots and lots of wine at this point, and what it tastes like is kind of irrelevant at this point. They bring out the cheap wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. So, 5 lessons. Now, you notice there's only a few blanks to fill in this morning, so this isn't going to be a real long sermon. Actually, it's longer than you think, because the sermon started the moment Damien and Aaliyah arrived up on stage. The moment they stepped up here, the sermon, you've already done the first 2 parts of the sermon. You just didn't realize you were doing the sermon. See, but the first lesson that we read here is lesson 1, know where to take your problem. There was a problem out there, and there were other solutions. They could have ran down to the corner of 7-Eleven and just bought some more wine, right? I'm sure somebody had some in a refrigerator at home. They could have ran home and got some more and brought it. I'm sure there were other solutions, but this was a problem, and I want you to see that Mary knew exactly where to take the problem. Just think about it. If we could just get that lesson down, that when we've got a problem in our life, we take it straight to Jesus. If we got that lesson down, man, this sermon would be a huge success. Know where to take your problems. Now, I do want you to know, was this a huge problem? Well, that depends on who you were. I mean, if you were the bridegroom, it was a huge problem because guess what? You would be shamed because you didn't plan well enough. And so it was the bridegroom's responsibility to provide the liquor of these things, not the bride. And so the bridegroom was supposed to prepare this stuff, and he didn't do his job well enough. So for the bridegroom, this would have been pretty bad. For the guests, this would have been pretty bad because the party's over. You got to go home now, right? But I want you to really think about it. The problem that Mary brings to Jesus, was it really an eternal problem? I mean, really, if they ran out of wine, there'd be some whispers and some nods and some, well, you didn't plan well enough, maybe even a little ribbing or public ridicule, I don't know. But honestly, was this really a huge problem? No. But it was a life problem. And you know what? Mary knew where to take that problem. She took that problem straight to, not the 7-Eleven, Jesus. Because she understood, I got a problem, and now I know where to take it. Lesson number 2, well, God has a plan. Now, I just want to let you know something. I didn't come this morning and think this up this morning when I got here. I didn't wake up this morning and drive to the church, and when I got here, say, I think I'll go get a couple of glasses and set them on the table. I don't know. We'll get a few bottles of water and put them out there, and we'll pick a couple of kids. I didn't do this morning. As a matter of fact, I've had the things to do this trick rolling around this church, hidden in various places for about a month, and I've actually practiced this trick about a dozen times to make sure that when I did it in front of people, it actually worked in front of people. You see, I came here this morning with a plan of how I was going to explain this story. And we need to understand that God had a plan. Now, when you hear Jesus responds to Mary, he says, woman, why does this concern me? My time has not come. That sounds a little rude. I mean, first of all, I would never look at my mom and say, woman, unless I want my dad to knock me to the floor. That just wouldn't be a smart move in my world because you just don't do that. But you understand, Jesus wasn't being disrespectful. Jesus was acknowledging he didn't come here to work parlor tricks. He didn't come here to impress people with how he can do this or that or the other. He wasn't here. He didn't come here to heal people. Did you know that? I mean, he did heal people, but that wasn't the point. He didn't come here so Peter could take a stroll on the top of the water. I mean, that happened, but that wasn't the point. And he didn't come here to turn water into wine. That wasn't the plan. You understand the plan that Jesus came to fulfill was that Jesus came to be the Lord and Savior for each and every one of us, so that our glasses can once again be clean, so that our sin and our stains can be washed away. That was the plan. It wasn't all of the other stuff. But think about it. When we think about Jesus' ministry, what do we usually want to talk about? Man, feeding of the 5,000. How many sermons in your church history have you heard about feeding the 5,000? Man, every minister has at least a dozen of them. I mean, that's a fun sermon to preach. You've probably heard this one done before. You've heard about Jesus healing the blind, healing the lame, healing the deaf, raising the dead. Man, we like to talk about all those things because that is the cool stuff. Those are the tricks. They're miracles. This is a trick. They're miracles. But you understand, that wasn't the purpose. God had a plan. God's plan was for Jesus to be our Savior. Lesson number 3. Here's one. Listen to Jesus and do what he says. Man, that's an interesting lesson. Because it involves 2 things. First, I have to open my ears. Remember the old rule? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Therefore, his intention was for you to listen twice as much as you speak. Okay? So listen to what Jesus is saying. and then do what he says. But I want you to think about, put yourself in the servant's place for just a moment. Mary looks at these guys and says, okay, whatever he says do it. Mary had no idea what he was going to ask them to do. Jesus could have said absolutely nothing. That would have been cool, because then they would have had to do absolutely nothing. But that's not what he did. But what he did ask them to do made absolutely no sense. I want you to take these jars, and understand they didn't go buy these jars. They just happened to be what was sitting there. It's kind of like these glasses. Okay, I did go buy these glasses, but there's nothing special about these glasses. These glasses are what they are. Matter of fact, if you like these glasses, you can make your way over to Dollar Tree after the service today, and they got them. They're $1 a piece. See, I didn't buy them because they had a certain shape, a certain color, a certain size. You know why I bought them? They were cheap. Okay? They were what I had available. When I walked in the dollar store, it was either these or something that had flowers on it. And I thought, these look cooler. Okay? So I bought these because they are exactly what's available. There's nothing special about these glasses. They are what they are. And these stone pots, they just happen to be sitting there. And Jesus looks at me and says, fill these things to the brim. And I'm sure they were like, those? That's where people wash themselves, Jesus. That's not sanitary. That's kind of disgusting. And fill it with water. Jesus, didn't you hear? We're not out of water. We're out of wine. I mean, why do I want to fill a stone jar pot with water? Because I don't want water. I want wine. But they did it, and it says when they filled the jars, the wise men, guess what? They filled it all the way to the brim. I mean, they filled it till they couldn't get another little piece in there. And then Jesus looked at him. He said, now dip a cup in and take it to the master of ceremonies. I do have one question. I wonder when it changed. I wonder when they looked at those stone pots and looked at that, if they just still saw water, dirty water at this point. Or maybe it was at that point that Jesus let them in on the trick and said, look, it's wine. You can take it. I wonder how Jesus actually made them dip the glass in, and they're walking down there toward the master of ceremony, looking at it like, it's still water. I'm going to get killed when I serve this. I mean, it's still water. It's still water. I wonder if the change happened the moment that the master, I don't know when it happened, but I can just imagine what the servant said when Jesus said, take some out and take it to the dude in charge and feed it to him. Really? That doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, all I put in that stone pot was water. And I'm looking for wine. And so we had to understand that for this to work, for the trick to work, for the miracle to happen, they had to listen to exactly what Jesus asked them to do, and then do exactly what Jesus asked them to do, even if it made no sense. That's why when people talk to me about baptism, they're like, well, I don't understand why I have to be baptized. You know what? I don't care why. You know why? Because Jesus said so. I look at my kids sometimes and they ask me why, and I look at them and just use my one word. It's called BIS. You know what BIS stands for? Because I said so. That's your only answer. That's the only thing I needed. And so what Mary is saying, don't ask questions. Don't look for the reason behind it. Just know Jesus asked you to do it. Listen to what he said do, and then do it. Man, that isn't that complicated, is it? Anybody can understand this lesson. How about lesson 4? What God provides is better than what man offers. Now, I do want you to pay attention. In order to get to lesson 4, they had to first do lesson 1, 2, and 3. If they had never made Jesus aware of the problem, if they had never reached out to him at all, if they hadn't realized that it was part of God's plan that he be glorified, if they had never done 1, 2, and 3, if they had never followed the instructions, this lesson never happens. As a matter of fact, the story ends. It ends with everybody going home. Okay? And so what has to happen is they have to realize what God provides is better than what man offers. Now, I just want you to make sure you understand what man had there was good. I mean, they had been drinking for a few days. And what they had there, obviously at least had some kind of pleasing taste to it, because they were all still there. And I want to make sure you understand, especially to our kids and our teenagers, what humanity, what the world offers. Let me tell you something. There's some good stuff out there. I know. I've tried a lot of it. Okay, there's some good stuff out there, but you know what? Now that I've been on this planet for about 50 years, I've learned there's good stuff out there, But what God has in store for me is so much better. Man, it's so much more impressive. And not only that, it is so much more available. Don't you love it? Jesus didn't just make a bottle, okay? He just didn't make a tub. I want you to do the math. This is why I told you to hang on to the number of gallons. So there were 6 jars at 20 to 30 gallons apiece. That means Jesus made between 120 and 180 gallons of water. It's of wine. 120 to 100. Jesus not only fixed the problem, they could stay there and drink for a few more days with what Jesus made. You understand the lesson here, right? What God has for your life is so much more better than what the world is offering. And you know what? It'll meet the needs so much more better because there's plenty of it. Grace from the world is very limited. Grace from God is unending. Mercy from the world, you might find it. Mercy from God, yeah, it just flows from his throne. Now that leaves us with one lesson. And this is the important lesson. You see, knowing the man is more important than understanding the trick. You notice what's missing from the story? Nobody went back to Jesus and said, "Hey, Jesus, how'd you do it? You slipped a little crystal light in the bottom of those vats before we poured that water in there, didn't you?" Yeah. It was something to it, right? You had some extra wine around and you kind of put it in there and we're just drinking down the watered down stuff now, right? And since everybody's so drunk, they don't realize what's good and what's bad at this point. So nobody was all that concerned about the trick. They were only concerned about, what does it say? And the disciples believed. Wow. That's impressive. See, they weren't interested in just the wine anymore. They became interested in who the man was. And so that's my question for you today. Do you know Jesus? Yeah, you might like to know how I did the trick. You know the secret, don't you? The secret is a magician never reveals his secrets. I'm not obligated to tell you how I did it. But here's the deal. I am really willing to tell you who this man Jesus is. He's an awesome dude. He is. He's cool. He loves me so much that he would be willing to die for me. As a matter of fact, he loved me so much that he did die for me. He loves me so much that he would be willing to live on earth when he was in heaven. He loves me so much that he had my need in the forefront of his mind. He is the Son of God. And you know, I can play the game with the 3 common glasses all day long. We could set this back up and I could do this again. But you do understand, this is a trick. There is a secret behind it. I don't have any magical powers. But God has a forgiving heart that he wants to share with you. And so my question is did you miss it? Did you miss the lessons because you were focused on the trick? We're going to do a time of invitation. I'm going to ask the worship team to start making their way back up here. And you know what? I got a feeling if I did the invitation this way, the first 5 people down the aisle, I'll tell you how I did the trick. I got a feeling that we might have some people that even though they don't like to be up in public, they might step out because they'd like to come down here and know how I did the trick. But I'm not giving you an invitation to know how I did the trick. But I am giving you the invitation to meet the man. His name is Jesus. He came, he lived, and he died for you. And now he wants to know, will you pour your life into his sacrifice? Would you please stand? We're going to pray.